He sat down in the wrong seat. The silver-haired executive next to him gave a smirk, his eyes flicking over Marcus's gray sweatshirt with obvious disdain. The first-class cabin was filled with soft snickers and whispers. Marcus flipped another page of his book without missing a beat, completely unfazed by the quiet judgment around him. Little did these Wall Street wolves realize he belonged in this cabin more than any of them. He owned something they never would, the very airline carrying them through the clouds. Marcus Mitchell adjusted the burgundy leather headrest of his seat, aboard Atlantic Skyways Flight 207, heading from Chicago to New York. At 40, his short hair was neat, and his calm expression showed a quiet confidence. He wore what he always did on flights, comfort over fashion, a soft gray sweatshirt, faded jeans, and worn sneakers. A small smile played on his lips as he opened his copy of We Should All Be Feminists, a book that had become his travel ritual. Reading it helped him calm the anxiety flying sometimes brought, a secret he kept even from his wife, Alicia. He'd boarded early, long before the usual parade of business travelers packed the cabin. He liked it that way, no fuss, no special treatment. Melissa, the flight attendant who had known him for years, gave a subtle nod as she passed by, whispering, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Mitchell." Their understanding was built on years of shared discretion. Privacy mattered. The first-class cabin began filling with men and women in tailored suits and designer dresses, the typical crowd of executives, lawyers, and Wall Street players who treated this route like a daily commute. Their conversations drifted around Marcus. Snippets of million-dollar deals, golf scores, and summer homes in the Hamptons. But Marcus was in his own world, wrapped in the comforting pages of his book. "Excuse me," a deep voice interrupted his thoughts. Marcus looked up to see a silver-haired man, probably in his late 50s, his suit expensive and his watch gleaming under the cabin lights. "I believe you're in my seat." Marcus calmly reached into his sweatshirt pocket and pulled out his boarding pass. 13A, that's mine." The man glanced at the pass with a barely hidden sneer, then at his own. "My mistake," he said without an apology. 13B, next to you." As the man settled into his seat, Marcus couldn't help but notice how his eyes scanned his sweatshirt, lingering with clear judgment. It was as if Marcus's casual clothes somehow threatened the immaculate suit beside him. "Walter Kingsley," the man introduced himself, extending a manicured hand. Marcus returned the handshake politely. "Marcus Mitchell." "No last name?" Walter asked, the smirk growing. Marcus had learned long ago that anonymity was a gift, especially in places like this. "First time in first class?" Walter asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "No, I fly quite regularly." Walter waved a hand dismissively. "Most people dress for the experience, you know, out of respect." Before Marcus could respond, a younger businessman across the aisle snorted quietly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A silent agreement, based on shared disdain. "Some people just get lucky with upgrades," the younger man said loud enough for Marcus to hear. "I've seen it happen. Airlines are practically giving away first class these days." Marcus smiled faintly and turned back to his book. His mother had taught him the grace of silence in the face of rudeness. Besides, Mr. Darcy's latest adventure was far more interesting than the limited imaginations around him. The flight was short, just under 2 hours if the weather held. Marcus had chosen this flight because he trusted the pilot, Captain Reynolds, whom his wife spoke highly of. Flying wasn't easy for Marcus. Alicia understood that and always made sure the best pilots flew him safely. This trip was a rare chance to travel alone after visiting his sister in Chicago. Alicia had stayed in New York, busy with meetings as CEO of Atlantic Skyways. She'd suggested he take the company plane, but Marcus preferred to fly under the radar. He loved the freedom of being just another passenger. As the cabin filled, Marcus overheard bits of conversation from the businessmen behind him. "Did you see Atlantic Skyways stock? Up 17% this quarter," one said. "Robert Mitchell really knows what he's doing." "He's a genius," another agreed. I'd give anything for a meeting with him. Marcus smiled quietly into his book. If only they knew. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and Marcus remained focused on his reading while the cabin buzzed with chatter. Across the aisle, 4 executives huddled, discussing quarterly projections with confident voices. Walter closed his laptop and asked, "So, Marcus, what do you do?" "Philanthropy," Marcus answered, marking his page. It wasn't a lie. He oversaw the Mitchell Foundation's charitable activities. But that wasn't the whole truth. Walter's interest waned instantly. "One of those nonprofits, saving whales and feeding the poor?" he said with a dismissive wave. "Something like that," Marcus replied with a smile, pointing to his sweatshirt. The man across the aisle, James Peterson from Goldman Sachs, leaned in. "Sounds more like a hobby than a career." Walter laughed. "Some of us actually work for a living." Marcus nodded politely and returned to his novel. 15 years of marriage to Alicia had taught him that some people only recognize worth when it comes with dollar signs and titles. They wouldn't understand the joy he found helping direct a $300 million endowment to causes that truly made a difference. The flight attendants began the first-class meal service. Marcus noticed familiar faces among the crew. Most knew who he was, but maintained the professional discretion he appreciated. Melissa approached with a warm smile. "Salmon or steak, Mr. Mitchell?" "Salmon, please," Marcus replied. Melissa turned to Walter. "And for you, sir?" "Steak, medium rare. Scotch neat," Walter said, his tone suddenly demanding. "You do have Macallan 18, right? I won't accept anything less." Melissa's smile stayed fixed, her professionalism intact. "Of course, sir." Walter leaned toward James. "That's how you handle the staff. They need to know who's in charge." James nodded. "First class is a statement. If you can't afford it, stay in economy." Marcus took a sip of water, his eyes still on the pages. He had met countless Walters before, men who measured their worth by how well they could dominate a room or a conversation. Suddenly, a woman's voice interrupted. "Some of us are trying to work. Could you keep it down?" Walter prepared to respond sharply, but stopped when he saw her. Diana Winters, a sharply dressed executive in her 50s. The two exchanged greetings, and Diana's eyes drifted to Marcus's sweatshirt with a mix of puzzlement and curiosity. "Never mind," she said, with a knowing smile, before returning to her work. Walter's suspicion lingered as the flight moved on. The flight had barely begun when the atmosphere in the cabin began to shift. Marcus Mitchell remained calm, his focus still on the pages of his book, "We Should All Be Feminists." The words soothed him, grounding him amid the quiet tension that buzzed around him. Around the cabin, the usual parade of Wall Street executives and business travelers filled their seats, their conversations filled with money, deals, and power. But Marcus was in his own world, comfortable and composed. He had chosen this flight intentionally. The Chicago to New York route was short, just under 2 hours if the weather cooperated. He preferred this flight because Captain Reynolds was at the controls, a pilot Alicia trusted implicitly. Flying wasn't easy for Marcus. He carried a quiet fear of it that only Alicia fully understood. She always made sure the best pilots flew their flights. Today was a rare chance for Marcus to travel alone. Alicia had stayed in New York, tied up in meetings as the CEO of Atlantic Skyways, the airline Marcus owned alongside her. She had offered for him to take the company plane, but Marcus declined. He enjoyed flying anonymously, blending in with the crowd. It gave him a break from the spotlight that came with their lives. As the cabin filled, Marcus overheard pieces of conversation from the men behind him. "Did you see Atlantic Skyways stock this quarter? It's up 17%, one said, clearly impressed. "Robert Mitchell knows exactly what he's doing." "He's a genius," another added. "I'd give anything to meet him." Marcus smiled quietly to himself. If only they knew. The seatbelt sign dinged off, signaling they were clear to move about. Marcus remained absorbed in his reading, the world of Regency England and Jane Austen's characters providing a welcome distraction. Across the aisle, 4 executives huddled together, deep in discussion about quarterly projections and market predictions. Their voices carried the confidence of men used to being right. Walter Kingsley, the silver-haired man seated beside Marcus, closed his laptop and turned toward him. "So, Marcus, what do you do?" His tone suggested boredom more than genuine interest. "Philanthropy," Marcus answered, marking his page with a gentle finger. It wasn't a lie. He oversaw the Mitchell Foundation's charitable activities, but it was only part of the truth. Walter's interest visibly faded. "One of those nonprofits, saving whales and feeding the poor?" he said with a dismissive wave. "Something like that," Marcus replied with a smile, nodding toward his sweatshirt. Across the aisle, James Peterson of Goldman Sachs leaned in with a smirk. "Sounds like a hobby more than a career." Walter chuckled. "Some of us actually work for a living." Marcus merely nodded, returning his attention to the book. 15 years of marriage to Alicia had taught him that some people only saw value in what came with dollar signs. These men wouldn't understand the joy he found directing a $300 million endowment toward causes that genuinely changed lives. The meal service began. Marcus noticed familiar faces among the flight crew, most of whom recognized him, but maintained the discretion he appreciated. Melissa approached with her usual warm smile. "Salmon or steak, Mr. Mitchell?" "Salmon, please," Marcus replied. Melissa then turned to Walter. "And for you, sir?" "Steak, medium rare. Scotch neat," Walter said, his tone shifting to one of quiet command. "You do have Macallan 18, right? I won't accept anything less." Melissa's professional smile never wavered. "Of course, sir." Walter leaned toward James across the aisle. "That's how you handle the staff. They need to know who's in charge." James nodded in agreement. "First class is a statement. If you can't afford it, stay in economy." Marcus took a sip of water, eyes still on his book. He had encountered countless men like Walter, men who measured their worth by dominance and status symbols. Then a woman's voice interrupted. "Some of us are trying to work. Could you keep it down?" Walter opened his mouth to respond but froze when he saw the woman behind him. Diana Winters from Capital, an executive in her 50s with a reputation for being sharp and unafraid to speak up. The two exchanged polite greetings, and Diana's eyes briefly flicked to Marcus's sweatshirt with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "Never mind," she said, with a knowing smile, before returning to her work. Walter glanced between the two, suspicion clear on his face. The flight continued, and the cabin was filled with the usual sounds of clinking silverware and hushed conversations. Marcus kept reading, undisturbed by the tension growing nearby. Walter and his companions resumed their discussion, louder now, their voices dripping with condescension. "So, Marcus," Walter said after a few moments, "how does someone in philanthropy afford first class? Husband, boyfriend, or just lucky with an upgrade?" Before Marcus could answer, the plane shuddered slightly as it hit a patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged on, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. We're experiencing some light turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Marcus set his book aside and gripped the armrest tightly. Flying was the part he hated most. The reminder that he was suspended 35,000 feet above the ground at the mercy of physics and weather. Walter noticed Marcus's white knuckles. "Afraid of flying?" he asked with a smirk. "A little," Marcus admitted quietly. Walter shrugged. Economy would have been just as turbulent but cheaper. Diana Winters cleared her throat loudly behind them. "Some people have manners. Apparently not you." Walter shot her an annoyed glance but said nothing more. The plane settled into smoother air, and Melissa returned with a steaming cup of chamomile tea for Marcus. "Here you go, sir," she said kindly. "Thank you, Melissa," Marcus said gratefully. Walter raised an eyebrow. "You must fly this route often." Marcus simply nodded, sipping his tea, his mind drifting to Alicia. She would be waiting at JFK. He knew she'd joke about him taking a cab, but she always made sure he was taken care of. The conversation behind Marcus continued. with Walter dismissing Alicia's husband's success as mere luck. Marcus tightened his grip on the book's pages. Robert Mitchell had rebuilt Atlantic Skyways from near bankruptcy through hard work, long hours, and smart decisions. It wasn't luck, it was determination. Later, Walter and his companions talked about the airline's turnaround, with Trevor expressing a wish to meet Marcus's wife. Marcus smiled faintly, knowing Alicia's achievements were entirely her own. Walter chuckled and called Alicia a smart woman, but James corrected him, saying she had her own successful business before marriage. Marcus continued reading, unmoved by their gossip. The meal was halfway through when Walter's complaints grew louder. He sent his steak back, declaring it overcooked, loudly explaining to James how a proper steak should be prepared. Marcus ate quietly, savoring the salmon, trying to ignore the increasing arrogance coming from beside him. "So tell me, Marcus," Walter said between bites, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "how does someone in philanthropy afford first class? Husband? Boyfriend? Or did you just get lucky with an upgrade?" Before Marcus could answer, the plane shuddered, hitting a patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged on, and Captain Reynolds' calm voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Marcus set his book aside and gripped the armrest tightly. Flying was the one thing he never got used to, a constant reminder that he was suspended miles above the ground, completely at the mercy of the elements. His palms felt sweaty, and the nerves tightened in his chest. Walter noticed Marcus's white knuckles. "Afraid of flying?" he sneered. "A little," Marcus admitted quietly. Walter chuckled. Economy would have been just as turbulent, but cheaper. A voice from behind cut through Walter's smirk sharply. "Some of us have manners. You might want to try that sometime." It was Diana Winters again. Her tone was calm but firm, her eyes locked on Walter with clear disapproval. Walter's irritation flared, but he held his tongue as the plane steadied and the captain announced smoother skies ahead. Melissa returned to Marcus with a steaming cup of chamomile tea. "Here you go, sir," she said with genuine concern. "Thank you, Melissa," Marcus replied with a small smile, grateful for the kindness. Walter raised an eyebrow. "You must fly this route often." Marcus nodded, sipping the tea, his thoughts drifting to Alicia. She'd be waiting at JFK, no doubt fussing about his choice to take a cab home rather than the company car. But Alicia liked him to feel normal, to have moments away from their high-profile lives. The executives behind him continued talking about Atlantic Skyways. Walter dismissed Robert Mitchell's success as luck, claiming anyone with inheritance could have done the same. Marcus's fingers tightened on the book. Robert had built the airline through sheer determination, long hours, and bold decisions, not luck. Later, Walter and the others speculated about Marcus's wife, Alicia. Trevor spoke openly about wanting to meet her, describing her as a former model who managed a successful foundation. Marcus smiled softly. Alicia's past was part of their story, but her strength and intelligence were what truly defined her. Walter chuckled dismissively. "You don't get to that level without connections. Merit only gets you so far." James added, "It's who you know, who your parents know, or who you marry." Marcus closed his book briefly, thinking of the many years he and Alicia had built their life together. They were partners in every sense, each bringing their own strengths. Walter and his friends had no idea what real partnership looked like. The conversation shifted as Melissa approached with fresh drinks for the men. Walter, always eager to impress, asked her about the CEU. "Ever meet the big boss?" he said with a smirk. Melissa kept her professional smile, but didn't hide her fatigue. "I've been with Atlantic Skyways 8 years, sir. Company policy doesn't allow me to discuss that." Walter pressed on. "Mitchell must fly his own airline sometimes. What's he like? Demanding? One of those entitled rich guys?" Melissa glanced toward Marcus briefly before turning away. "I really couldn't say, sir." Trevor leaned in. "Bet his wife's a piece of work, too. Those trophy wives always are." Marcus set his book down gently, standing. Excuse me, I need to use the restroom. As he passed Walter's knees, Walter made no effort to stand or move, forcing Marcus to squeeze awkwardly by. He could feel their eyes on him, and faint muffled laughter followed him down the aisle. Inside the small bathroom, Marcus splashed cold water on his face. Normally, he would ignore ignorance and rudeness. He had heard worse over the years. But today, after a stressful week of worrying about his sister's health and the strain of flying, his patience was thin. Returning to his seat, Marcus noticed Walter and his group comparing watches, their Patek Philippe, Rolex, Breitling, each trying to outdo the other. That's what separates us from them, Walter said, gesturing vaguely toward economy class. Understanding quality, status. First class isn't just a wider seat, it's a mindset. His eyes locked on Marcus as he settled back into his seat. Don't you agree, Marcus? Marcus smiled faintly. I believe comfort is more important than status. Walter sneered. Says someone in a sweatshirt. Diana Winters spoke up again from behind them. Perhaps he doesn't need a costume to prove his worth.